Have you ever done something you thought you'd never do, just because you were out of options? Have you ever looked at yourself in the mirror and whispered, "That's not who I am," but you did it anyway? This is a story about a man who lived with integrity his whole life, until the day love demanded a price he didn't know how to pay. And in trying to save the one he loved most, he broke something inside himself. Hello and welcome to Jackson English Stories, the place where we don't just teach English, we share real human stories that help you grow, in language and in life. In the next few minutes, you'll hear a story that might challenge your idea of right and wrong. A story not about criminals, but about good people making impossible choices, about love, fear, and the long road to redemption. And if you've ever carried a mistake that no one else knew about, if you've ever asked, "Can I still be a good person after what I've done?" then stay with me, because this story is for you. Let's begin. I am an old man now. My hair has turned gray. My hands are slower and my back often aches in the morning. But strangely enough, my memories feel sharper than ever. I don't remember what I had for dinner last Thursday, but I remember the way the sunlight used to hit the classroom window when I was 23. I remember the laughter of children echoing down the hallway. And I remember her smile, her voice, her cough. People say time heals everything, but I've learned that time doesn't always erase the past. Sometimes, it just gives us more space to think about it. You see, the older I get, the more I realize the past never really leaves you. It waits quietly in the corners of your mind, and sometimes on a quiet afternoon, when the house is still and the tea has gone cold, it comes to visit. Some people carry medals or photo albums or old letters from their youth. Me? I carry a decision I made a long time ago, a moment that changed me, not just my life, but who I believed I was. And I want to tell you that story, not because I'm proud of it, but because I believe we all have a chapter we wish we could rewrite. Maybe yours hasn't come yet, or maybe it came and never left. Either way, this story isn't just mine anymore. Because what happened next that one winter evening is where everything began to unravel. Let me take you there. Back then, my life was simple. I was a school teacher in a small town. Nothing fancy, nothing big. Just a man with a chalkboard, a warm coat, and a short walk to work. Every morning I would wake up before the sun rose. The house would be quiet, the air cool, and my wife Emily would still be asleep, curled up under our old quilt. I'd stand there for a moment, just watching her breathe. Even after all those years, her presence still gave me peace. We didn't have much. Our home was small, the paint was peeling, and the roof creaked when it rained. But it was ours. And it was filled with something many people spend their whole lives chasing: genuine peace. At school, the children would greet me with messy hair, bright eyes, and voices full of curiosity. They didn't care about my salary. They didn't know about bills or medicine or politics. They just wanted to know, why does the moon follow us at night? Or can animals dream? And when the last bell rang and the chalk dust settled, I would walk home. And there she was, Emily, standing at the door, apron still on, her hands smelling of garlic and herbs. She'd say, "You look tired." And I'd say, "So do you." Then we'd laugh, and just like that, the weight of the day disappeared. You know, we often search for happiness in the grand, the new, the exciting. But I've learned, and maybe too late, that real joy lives in the quiet places. In the way someone remembers how you take your tea. In the sound of two forks clinking as dinner is served. in the comfort of sitting in silence with someone who doesn't need you to speak to feel your love. That was our life. Ordinary, maybe, but full of meaning. And yet, even the most peaceful lives are not immune to storms. Because one day, Emily started coughing and didn't stop. And just like that, the warmth we built together began to flicker. It started as a small sound, a soft cough at the dinner table. At first, we laughed about it. Emily blamed the pepper in the soup, and I teased her gently. "Getting old, huh?" She rolled her eyes and waved me off. But the cough didn't go away. It came back the next morning, then again that evening, and within days, it was no longer something we laughed about. Emily began to grow tired. She would rest more, sit longer, talk less. The sparkle in her eyes, the one that had always been there, even on our hardest days, started to fade. I brought her tea, tucked her in, and told myself it was just the flu. "Just a bug," I said. "She'll bounce back in a week." But deep down, I knew. I took her to the doctor. A kind man with glasses too big for his face, who had known us for years. He examined her, asked a few questions, and then paused. That pause. It's strange how silence can say more than words ever could. He gave us medicine. He told me she needed rest and time. And then he added something I hadn't expected. The treatment will help, but it won't be cheap. That night, I sat by her bed and stared at the brown bottle on the table. It was just one dose, one bottle, enough for now. But what about tomorrow, and the day after? I was a teacher, a good one, but not a rich one. And in that moment, I learned a hard truth that so many people quietly live with. Love doesn't protect us from the cost of reality. No matter how deeply we care, medicine still has a price. And that price doesn't care about how long you've been married or how many good things you've done in life. I thought of all the students I'd helped, the extra hours I'd spent, the weekends I gave up. None of it mattered now, not to the pharmacist, not to the bill. That night, as I watched Emily sleep, her breathing shallow, her body tired, I whispered a silent promise. I'll find a way. But I had no idea just how far that promise would take me, and what it would cost. The next morning, I went to work just like every other day. I wore my nicest shirt, combed my thinning hair, smiled at the neighbors as I passed by, but everything felt hollow. Like I was walking through the world, but not really in it. At school, the children greeted me with laughter and joy. "Teacher, teacher," one little boy shouted, tugging at my sleeve. He wanted to show me the drawing he made, a messy crayon picture of a tree with 3 crooked birds. I smiled, I even laughed, but inside, I was falling apart. I couldn't stop thinking about the bottle on the nightstand. The last dose of medicine. The way Emily's fingers had trembled when she tried to lift a spoon that morning. Each lesson I taught, each word I said felt like I was acting in a play. I could see myself from the outside, the kind teacher, the patient mentor. But on the inside, I was screaming. And yet, I told no one, because that's what many of us do, isn't it? We hide our desperation behind polite smiles and automatic "I'm fines." We go to work, pay the bills, answer emails, all while quietly wondering if anyone would notice if we simply broke down. You see, there's a special kind of loneliness that comes not from being alone, but from pretending you're not drowning. I was surrounded by people, students, coworkers, even friends, but no one knew what I was carrying, and I didn't want them to know. Because admitting I was struggling meant admitting I was failing, as a provider, as a husband, as a man. That afternoon, one of my older students, a quiet girl named Lily, stayed behind after class. She looked up at me and asked softly, "Teacher, Are you okay? For a moment, I wanted to say it all. I wanted to fall apart right there and let the truth spill out. But I didn't. I forced a smile and said, "Yes, I'm just a little tired today." She nodded, gave me a shy smile, and left. And I sat there alone in the classroom, surrounded by empty chairs, wishing I could be honest. That night, I stood by Emily's bed. She reached for my hand and whispered, "Don't worry." But I did. I worried more than ever. And I was beginning to understand just how dangerous love can be when you're willing to do anything just to keep it alive. And it was on one of those quiet, desperate nights that I made a choice I never thought I would. A choice that would change everything. It was a Thursday night. The streets were quiet, the kind of silence that feels too still, like the whole world is holding its breath. I couldn't sleep. Emily had coughed for most of the evening, then finally drifted off, exhausted. I sat in the kitchen, staring at an empty wallet and a prescription that was about to run out. The numbers didn't lie. My paycheck wouldn't come for another week. The savings we had were already gone. There was no one left to borrow from. No hidden stash, no miracle. Just silence, and a kind, sick woman sleeping in the next room, the only person who had ever loved me with her whole heart. So I stepped outside, not with a plan, just a need to breathe. I walked through the town like a ghost, past the bakery, the post office, the small church on the corner. Then I saw it, the corner store. The lights were off, but inside I could see everything. Loaves of bread on the shelf, bottles of water, and just behind the counter, the cash register. It was closed, but not empty. A soft glow from a nearby streetlight made the bills inside glisten, just enough to catch the eye. My heart started to race. I told myself I wasn't thinking about it. But the truth is, I was. Because desperation makes space for thoughts you never believed you'd entertain. I stood there for what felt like an hour. No cars, no people, just me and a choice. I bent down and picked up a small rock. My hands were shaking. I kept hearing Emily's voice in my head, the way she said, "Don't worry," the way she still smiled despite everything. I was a teacher, a good man, someone who taught children about right and wrong. But standing there in the cold dark, all of that felt distant. I threw the rock. The sound of glass shattering ripped through the street like thunder. For a moment, I froze. Nothing happened. No alarms, no footsteps, just the wind and the sound of my own heartbeat. I reached through the broken window, unlocked the door, and stepped inside. The store smelled of fruit and flour and something else I can't quite describe, maybe shame. I walked to the register, opened it, grabbed a handful of bills, and stuffed them in my coat. My hands were sweating so much I nearly dropped them. Then, a noise. Footsteps. I panicked. I ran. I don't remember the way home. Only the sound of my shoes on pavement and the voice in my head screaming, "What have you done?" When I got home, Emily was still asleep. I looked at her, and for a moment, I almost convinced myself it was okay, that it was for her, that it didn't make me a bad person. But deep inside, I knew. Because even when we do the wrong thing for the right reason, it's still wrong. And that truth, that simple, painful truth, would haunt me far longer than I could ever imagine. But for now, all I could do was hide the money and pretend that everything was okay, that I was still me, that nothing had changed. But something had, and the weight of it was only just beginning. That night, after I had locked the front door behind me, I sat in the kitchen, the same kitchen where I once read books, shared tea, and laughed with Emily. But this time, I didn't feel like myself. The bills were still warm in my coat pocket, And yet, I felt colder than I ever had. Emily stirred softly in the next room. She didn't know what I had done. She didn't ask. I placed the money on the table. I told myself it was enough for her medicine, enough for now. But somehow, it still wasn't. Because I had stolen more than just paper that night. I had stolen my own peace. The next morning, I walked to the pharmacy. The pharmacist greeted me with a cheerful voice, as he always did. He handed me the bottle, smiled, and said, "This should help her feel better." I nodded. But I couldn't speak. My mouth was dry. My eyes avoided his. I walked home quickly, gripping the brown paper bag like it might shatter in my hands. When I got home, Emily was awake. Pale, tired, but awake. She smiled softly when she saw the medicine. "Thank you," she whispered as I handed her the bottle. That moment, that tiny moment, should have brought me peace, but instead, it broke me a little more. Because she said thank you with trust in her eyes. Trust I no longer deserved. And that's the part no one warns you about when you do the wrong thing for the right reason. They tell you about the fear, they tell you about the consequences, but they don't tell you about the quiet moments that come after. When you sit across from someone you love and realize they still see you as good, but you don't. That day at school, I couldn't focus. Every time I heard footsteps in the hallway, I flinched. Every time a student laughed, it felt too loud, like it didn't belong in the same world as me. I had become a man with a secret, and secrets have a weight. They live in your spine, in your chest, in your hands when they tremble even when no one's watching, and the worst part, no one else can carry it for you. That week, Emily began to get better. A little more color in her cheeks, a little more strength in her voice. And for that, I was grateful. But the guilt? It didn't heal as easily. It grew quiet, but not weaker. Because even if the world moved on, even if no one found out, I still had to live with the man I had become. And one evening, I found myself back in front of that store. The glass had been replaced, the lights were on, the owner was inside. And I didn't know what to do. But I knew this much. I couldn't go on like this forever. Something had to change. Each day, Emily grew a little stronger. She could sit up for longer. She smiled more. Her voice, once soft and strained, began to sound like music again. She even laughed once when I accidentally burned the toast. That laugh, it should have made me feel lighter. But somehow, it made the guilt even heavier. Because every time I looked at her, every time she said thank you or touched my hand, I heard a voice in my head that whispered, "She thinks you saved her. But she doesn't know what you did." I had given her a bottle of hope, but I had paid for it with a piece of myself. And the more she healed, the more I felt broken. Some nights I couldn't sleep. I would sit alone at the table, staring at the quiet house. Emily would be resting peacefully finally, but I wasn't. I thought about the store, the sound of the glass breaking, the way my hands shook when I reached into the register. I thought about the shopkeeper, who probably came in the next morning and saw the mess. Did he feel angry? Scared? Did he look around and wonder what kind of person could do such a thing? The truth haunted me more than the crime ever could. Because no one had caught me. No one had accused me. No one had even looked at me differently. But I had changed. I no longer recognized the man who looked back at me in the mirror. Not because of how I looked, but because of what I was willing to justify. And that's the thing about guilt, it doesn't need an audience. It just needs a conscience. Sometimes people think that doing the wrong thing will feel dramatic, cinematic, full of tension and chase scenes. But most of the time, it feels like sitting in a quiet room with your own thoughts and realizing they won't let you rest. I tried to tell myself it was worth it. Emily was getting better. That should have been enough. But doing the right thing for someone else doesn't erase the wrong thing you did. And the longer I kept that secret inside, the more it started to eat away at who I was. Until one day, I found myself back in front of the store again, not by accident, not to steal, but because something inside me said, "It's time." I didn't plan it. I didn't rehearse what I would say. I just walked. One morning, before school, I left the house early. Emily was still asleep, her breathing steady, a faint smile on her lips. I looked at her one last time, then stepped outside, carrying a small envelope in my coat pocket. It wasn't much. Not the same amount I had taken. Just what I had. Some bills, a few coins. All I could gather over the past few days. I didn't expect it to make anything right. But I knew this. I couldn't carry the weight of doing nothing any longer. The walk to the store felt longer than usual. The streets were busy now, alive with morning chatter and footsteps, but inside me everything was still, but heavy. When I reached the corner store, the window had long been repaired. The glass was clear, the shelves restocked, and the shopkeeper, stood behind the counter, quietly arranging some boxes. He looked the same as always, ordinary, calm. But to me, in that moment, he looked like judgment itself. I didn't go in, not yet. Instead, I stood outside for a while, heart pounding, watching him work. And then, slowly, I stepped forward, opened the door, and entered. The bell above the door rang softly, that familiar chime that had once sounded so innocent. He gave me a polite smile. "Good morning," he said. I nodded. For a moment, we just stood there, him behind the counter, me in front of it, trying to steady my breath. Then, I reached into my pocket, pulled out the envelope, and gently placed it on the counter. He looked at it, then at me. His eyebrows knit slightly, unsure. "What's this for?" he asked. I opened my mouth, but the words didn't come. I couldn't bring myself to say it, not yet. So I simply said, "I just want to help. Please, take it. It belongs here." He looked at me again, really looked. Then, without pressing, without judgment, he nodded and took the envelope. That was it. No accusations, no questions, just a quiet act of receiving and, maybe in his own way, forgiving. And in that small silence, something shifted in me. Because redemption doesn't always come with applause or headlines. Sometimes it begins in the quiet. When you choose to stop running, even if no one's chasing. I walked home with lighter steps. Not because everything was fixed, not because I was suddenly clean, but because I had moved one small stone from the mountain I was carrying. It was the first step. But deep down I knew, if I truly wanted to make peace with myself, silence wouldn't be enough. One day I'd have to speak. I'd have to tell the truth, out loud, face to face. Days passed, and for a while, I thought that envelope, that quiet gesture was enough. But the truth has a way of waiting, of whispering to you in the silence until you can no longer ignore it. Each time I walked by the store after school, I would slow down, glance through the window, and feel that ache in my chest. The shopkeeper was always there, sweeping, restocking, helping customers. And somehow his calmness made the guilt worse. Because I had returned the money, but I hadn't returned the truth, and that meant the lie was still alive. One evening, just before sunset, I found myself standing outside the shop again. This time, I wasn't carrying money. I was carrying something heavier. A confession. My hands trembled as I reached for the door. The bell rang again, soft and familiar. The shopkeeper looked up, met my eyes, and offered that same small smile. "Back again?" he asked. I nodded, but this time I didn't pretend. "I have to tell you something," I said, barely above a whisper. He paused, set down his broom, and gave me his full attention. I swallowed hard. My mouth felt dry. My chest was tight, but I forced the words out. That night, the broken window, the missing money, it was me. The silence that followed felt endless. He didn't move, didn't speak. I stood there, exposed, like a man stripped of everything but shame, and then he nodded. "I knew," he said quietly. I blinked. "You knew?" He gave a soft, tired smile. "I didn't see your face, but the next morning you came looking like the weight of the world was on your back. I had a feeling." I looked down, ashamed. "I was desperate," I said. "My wife was sick. I didn't know what else to do." He nodded again. "I understand," he replied. "But there is always a choice." Those words sank into me like stones in water. They didn't come from a place of anger. They came from truth, and sometimes truth delivered gently hurts more than punishment. "I'm sorry," I said. My voice cracked. "I truly am." He looked at me for a long moment. Then he said something I'll never forget. "Come work here. Help me in the store. Not because you owe me, but because I believe people deserve a chance to give back." For a second, I couldn't speak. I felt my eyes fill with tears, not from guilt this time, but from something I hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. Because I had expected punishment. What I found was grace. And that was the day I realized. A second chance doesn't erase what you've done, but it invites you to become someone better because of it. The next morning, I put on a different shirt, not for school, but for the store. And as I tied on the apron, I felt something shift inside me. Not everything was fixed, but for the first time in a long while, I felt like myself again. I never thought redemption would come with a broom in my hand. But there I was, sweeping the shop floor, stacking boxes, greeting customers with a quiet good morning. The work wasn't glamorous. It wasn't heroic, but it was honest, and that mattered more to me than it ever had before. Each morning, I showed up early, not because I had to, but because I wanted to. Because every small task, wiping down a shelf, restocking the fruit, making coffee for the first customer, felt like a stitch in the fabric of a man I was slowly sewing back together. I was no longer hiding, no longer pretending. The weight on my chest didn't vanish overnight, but it grew lighter each time I chose honesty over silence. At home, Emily continued to heal. She started sitting by the window again, watching the birds, humming little tunes from our younger days. She didn't know the full story, not yet, but she knew something in me had changed. And in her eyes, I saw something I feared I'd lost forever: respect. You see, I didn't become perfect. I still made mistakes, I still carried regrets, but I became someone I could look in the mirror and face again. Because when we stop running from who we were, we can finally walk toward who we're meant to be. That's the quiet beauty of second chances. They don't rewrite your past, but they let you choose how the story ends. And I chose to end mine, not as a man who once stole, but as a man who stood up, spoke out, and spent the rest of his days making it right. One small, honest step at a time. Because in the end, being a good man isn't about never falling. It's about who you become after you rise. We all carry something. Maybe it's a mistake no one knows about, a secret we've buried under years of silence. Or maybe it's just the quiet question we ask ourselves at night. Am I still a good person after everything I've done? The truth is, no one lives a perfect life. We all stumble, We all fall. But what defines us is not the moment we fall. It's the choice we make after. Like the man in this story. We don't always get to undo the past, but we can choose to face it, to make it right, to live differently, even if no one else ever knows why. Maybe you're carrying something like that right now. Maybe it's recent, or maybe it's something from years ago, still sitting quietly in the back of your mind. If so, I want you to remember this. You are not beyond forgiveness. You are not too far gone, and it's never too late to begin again. Even a small step, a conversation, a confession, a change in how you live tomorrow can be the beginning of something bigger than you ever imagined. If this story touched something in you, even just a little, leave a comment below. Tell me what part stayed with you, or share your own moment of change. And if you know someone who might need this story, someone carrying a quiet burden, send it to them. Sometimes the right story at the right time can soften a heart and open a door. And if you'd like to hear more stories like this, stories that don't just teach English, but speak to the human heart, then subscribe to this channel. Because here at Jackson English Stories, we believe that language becomes real when it's lived through life. Thank you for listening. Take care of yourself, and remember, the road back to who you are is always waiting, one honest step at a time.